My husband was beating on my front door, hard enough to rattle the picture frames, shouting that I had ruined his life. 3 days earlier, I had been sitting in a plastic chair outside the pediatric wing at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital in Nashville, holding my phone with both hands so I wouldn't drop it. My daughter Emma was 2 years old, curled up under a thin hospital blanket with an IV taped to her little hand. A nurse named Patrice had just told me the words, "No mother ever wants to hear. We need to move quickly, Mrs. Bennett." I was 46 years old, an Army logistics officer out of Fort Campbell, and I had spent half my adult life solving problems with bad roads, late shipments, and missing supplies. But sitting there in that hallway staring at a hospital bill estimate, I felt like a scared young woman with no rank, no plan, and no air in my lungs. The amount I needed right away was $500. Not 55,000, not some impossible movie number, just enough to make you think, surely somebody who loves us will help. So I called my husband, Mark. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding annoyed. "Rebecca, I'm in the middle of something. Emma needs surgery," I said. "They need the payment today. It's $5,500. There was a pause, but not the kind I needed. No fear, no panic, no, I'm on my way. Then he said, "We just closed on the beach house." I blinked at the beige hospital wall. What? The destined place. Every dollar's tied up right now. Our daughter is in a hospital bed. He lowered his voice like I was embarrassing him in public. You'll have to figure it out yourself." Before I could answer, I heard his mother in the background. Linda had that sharp church lady voice that could cut fabric. Then she cut in. "Stop calling my son," she said. "Go ask the Army." The line went dead. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear long after the call ended. Across the hall, a vending machine hummed. Somewhere, nearby, a baby cried, and a doctor laughed softly at something a nurse said, like normal life had the nerve to keep going. I didn't cry right away. I folded the estimate in half, then in half again, until the paper was small enough to fit in my palm. That evening around 7:40, Mark's father, Harold Bennett, came walking down the hallway in khakis and an old Vanderbilt ball cap. He looked smaller than I remembered. He didn't ask where Mark was. He didn't defend Linda. He just sat beside me, reached into his jacket pocket, and slipped a plain white envelope into my hand. "Take this," he said. "Harold, I can't." "Yes, you can." His eyes were wet, but his voice stayed steady. Then he leaned close and whispered, "Don't open the letter inside until you're home." Nah. That was when I realized the envelope wasn't just help. It was a warning. I didn't open Harold's envelope that night. I couldn't. Emma had finally fallen asleep after hours of tests, blood draws, and doctors coming in and out of her room. The monitors beside her bed beeped in a slow, steady rhythm that somehow made the silence feel even heavier. I sat in the recliner by the window, holding that plain white envelope in my lap. For the first time in 22 years of marriage, I realized I was afraid of what the truth might look like. Outside, the Nashville skyline glowed beyond the parking garage. My Army duffel bag sat unopened in the corner. I had left Fort Campbell so quickly that morning, I hadn't even unpacked my uniform before rushing Emma to Vanderbilt. Around midnight, I finally broke the seal. The first thing I saw was a cashier's check, $5,500, exactly what the hospital needed. I stared at it until the numbers blurred. Then I unfolded Harold's handwritten letter. His handwriting looked shaky. "Rebecca, please don't argue with me about this money. Emma needs it now." I wish I had spoken sooner. I kept hoping Mark would come to his senses. He didn't. "He's been lying to you much longer than you realize." That was it. No long explanation. Just one sentence that made my stomach drop. I folded the letter fully and slipped it back inside. The next morning, I walked downstairs to the billing office and handed over the cashier's check. The woman behind the counter smiled. "You're all set, Mrs. Carter." Hearing those 4 words nearly brought me to tears. Emma's surgery could finally move forward. When I returned upstairs, Harold was waiting outside the room with 2 cups of coffee from the hospital cafe. "I figured yours would be cold by now," he said. He knew me too well. We sat together in the hallway while Emma slept. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest all night. "Why did you write that letter?" Harold stared down into his coffee. "Because I should have told you years ago." I didn't interrupt. "When you and Mark got married," he said quietly. I thought he'd grow into the kind of man you deserved." He gave a sad little laugh. I kept waiting. "That hurt more than I expected," Harold continued. "You were deployed. You missed birthdays, anniversaries, Christmas mornings, but every time you came home, you acted like you were the lucky one." I smiled faintly. "I was." "No," he said, looking straight at me. "You were carrying everyone." His words brought back memories I'd spent years pushing aside. I remembered mailing deployment checks home from Kuwait, picking up extra assignments, because the tax-free pay helped cover Mark's struggling roofing business, living in military housing, while Mark built his company one customer at a time. When Emma was born, I turned down a promotion because another assignment would have moved us across the country. Mark had hugged me that night. "I'll never forget what you're giving up for us." Apparently, he already had. As his business grew, little things began changing. He stopped asking about my day. He rolled his eyes whenever I mentioned another training exercise. Linda never missed a chance to remind me what she thought. "A child needs her mother," she'd say over Thanksgiving dinner. "Not another medal." I usually smiled and changed the subject. It seemed easier. Now, sitting beside Harold in a hospital hallway, I wondered how many little compromises had quietly become one enormous mistake. Harold reached into his pocket and handed me a folded receipt. "Withdrew most of my retirement savings yesterday." I looked at him stunned. "You used your retirement?" He nodded. "For Emma, I'll pay you back." He smiled gently. "I know you would." Before I could say anything else, he rested a hand on my shoulder. "Rebecca." His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "The beach house." He hesitated. "It isn't just in Mark's name by accident." I felt my heartbeat quicken. "There are things you don't know." I didn't answer Harold right away. The hallway suddenly felt colder, even though it was late July. "What do you mean?" I finally asked. He looked down the corridor before speaking, almost like he wanted to make sure no one was listening. "The beach house wasn't supposed to be only Mark's." I frowned. "I don't understand." "You were?" For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. Harold took a slow sip of his coffee. "About 6 weeks ago, Mark asked me to look over some closing documents. You know, I've always handled paperwork better than he has." I nodded. "He left them on the dining room table while he took a phone call." Harold's face tightened. I wasn't snooping. I was checking the numbers like he asked. He reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a small piece of paper. "I copied this before I left." It was the property address in Dest, Florida. Below it was a handwritten note. "Owner Mark Bennett." Nothing else. "No joint ownership?" I asked. He slowly shook his head. "Not even your name anywhere?" I stared at the paper. "But we've always bought everything together." "I know. My military income helped qualify for the loan." "I know. I've been making deposits into our savings for years." "I know." Every answer sounded like another brick falling on my chest. Harold sighed. "I asked Mark why your name wasn't included." "What did he say?" He told me. Harold hesitated. He said, "Military marriages don't always last." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes the truth is so ugly your mind refuses to believe it. "That's ridiculous." I hoped it was. He looked at me with genuine regret. But then Linda walked into the kitchen. I already knew this wasn't going to end well. She said it was smart planning. I closed my eyes. Harold continued quietly. "She said if anything happened between the two of you, at least the beach house would stay in the family." I opened my eyes again. So I wasn't family anymore. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Just then my phone buzzed. For one hopeful second, I thought it might be Mark asking about Emma. Instead, it was a notification from Facebook. Linda had posted new pictures. She and Mark were standing on a white sand beach, smiling in front of a 2-story house with blue shutters. The caption read, "Dreams really do come true. Family first." I stared at those 2 words. Family first. Emma was lying upstairs connected to monitors. Mark hadn't even asked how the surgery was scheduled. I quietly locked my phone and slipped it into my purse. Harold noticed. "Was that Linda?" I nodded. He didn't ask to see the pictures. He already knew. After a long silence, he spoke again. "I argued with both of them." "You did. They told me I was overreacting." He gave a tired smile. "At my age, you stop worrying about sounding dramatic. You just say what's right." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Thank you." He looked embarrassed. "I should have done more." "No." I shook my head. "You came." That afternoon, the pediatric cardiologist stopped by Emma's room. Her surgery was scheduled for 7 the next morning. There were risks, no guarantees, just hope. That night, I barely slept. Every few minutes, I checked Emma's breathing. Around 4 in the morning, I found myself staring at the ceiling, thinking about the beach house. Part of me wanted to call Mark and demand an explanation. Another part of me knew it wouldn't change anything before Emma's surgery. My daughter needed all of me. The truth about my marriage could wait one more day, or at least I thought it could. At 6:15 the next morning, just as the nurses began preparing Emma for surgery, my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't Mark, it was my bank. Fraud alert. Unusual account activity detected. My heart sank. Something else was terribly wrong. By 7 that morning, Emma was lying on a narrow hospital bed, wearing a tiny blue gown with cartoon elephants printed on it. She looked so small that the blanket seemed oversized. A nurse with silver hair smiled as she adjusted Emma's stuffed bunny beside her. "We'll take good care of your little girl." I wanted to believe her. When they wheeled Emma toward the operating room, she reached one sleepy hand toward me. "Mommy, I'm right here, sweetheart." I kissed her forehead. "I'll be waiting when you wake up." Those were the hardest words I'd ever said because I couldn't promise they were true. The doors closed, and suddenly there was nothing left to do but wait. Harold stayed with me. He didn't try to fill the silence with advice or empty reassurance. Instead, he walked to the cafeteria and came back with 2 breakfast sandwiches neither of us touched. Around 9, my younger sister Claire drove up from Clarksville after taking the morning off from teaching 2nd grade. She wrapped me in the kind of hug only a sister can give. "You look exhausted." "I feel worse." She sat beside me for nearly 2 hours. We talked about everything except surgery. Emma's favorite Disney movies. The tomatoes growing in Dad's old garden. The stray cat that kept showing up on my front porch. Anything that reminded me normal life still existed. Just after 11, my phone buzzed. For one impossible second, I hoped it was Mark. It wasn't, it was another Facebook notification. Normally, I ignored social media. This time, curiosity got the better of me. Linda had uploaded 6 new photos. Mark stood barefoot on the deck of the beach house, holding a glass of champagne. Linda was smiling beside him. One caption read, "Finally celebrating all our hard work." Another said, "Blessed beyond words." I stared at the screen until Claire quietly took the phone from my hand. "You don't need this today." She turned it face down. "You've got enough to carry." She was right. Still, the images stayed in my head. Champagne glasses, ocean views, my daughter lying on an operating table. Couldn't make those 2 worlds fit together. At 12:30, the surgeon finally walked into the waiting room. Every parent in the room stood up at once. He smiled when he saw me. "Mrs. Carter." My knees nearly gave out. The surgery went well. I didn't hear another word for several seconds. Claire started crying before I did. Harold quietly removed his glasses and wiped his eyes. The surgeon explained that Emma would spend the next couple of days in the pediatric intensive care unit. Recovery would take time. There would be follow-up appointments, medication, lots of patience. But he was optimistic. That single word, optimistic. It felt like someone had opened a window after days of darkness. Later that afternoon, I finally sat beside Emma's bed in the ICU. She was still asleep, surrounded by tubes and monitors, but her breathing looked peaceful. Harold walked in carrying a paper bag. I figured hospital coffee wasn't going to cut it. Inside were my favorite peanut butter crackers and a fresh cup from a little cafe a few blocks away. He remembered. Mark hadn't remembered my birthday the year before, but his father remembered what snacks I liked during stressful days. Life has a strange way of showing you who truly sees you. Just before sunset, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't social media. It wasn't Mark. It was a text from my bank asking me to confirm several online transfers I had never authorized. My stomach tightened. I opened my banking app. 3 withdrawals. 1 savings account nearly $18,000. Gone. I stared at my phone until the numbers stopped looking real. Savings balance $842.17. Just 2 days earlier, there had been over $18,000 in that account. For a moment, I wondered if the hospital had made a mistake. Maybe insurance had processed something twice. Maybe the app was glitching. I refreshed the screen. Nothing changed. 3 online transfers. 3 different amounts, all completed within the previous 48 hours. The ICU suddenly felt too quiet. Emma was still sleeping peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling beneath the blanket. I slipped my phone into my pocket and stepped into the hallway before calling the bank. After answering 3 security questions, the representative asked, "Mrs. Carter, did you authorize these transfers?" "No." She became very serious. "I'm placing an immediate freeze on the account. Can you tell me where the money went?" "I'm sorry, but I can only tell you it was transferred to another account under a joint authorization." Joint authorization. Those 2 words hit me harder than I expected. Mark and I had shared that account for years. I thanked her, hung up, and leaned against the wall. Harold found me a few minutes later. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I handed him my phone. He adjusted his glasses and slowly read through the transactions. His shoulders sagged. "I was afraid of this." "You knew?" "No." He shook his head quickly. "I just knew Mark had started hiding things." I wanted to be angry. Instead, I felt tired. 22 years of marriage suddenly felt like a stack of papers someone had quietly shredded while I wasn't looking. That evening, after Emma was moved from intensive care to a regular pediatric room, Claire convinced me to drive home for a shower and a change of clothes. "You'll think more clearly after a few hours of sleep." She was right. Walking into my own house felt strange. Everything looked exactly the same. Emma's crayons were still on the kitchen table. Her little pink rain boots sat beside the back door. Life had stopped in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. As I carried my overnight bag upstairs, I noticed the door to Mark's home office was slightly open. Normally, I wouldn't have gone inside, but nothing about my life felt normal anymore. The room smelled faintly of cedar and printer ink. His desk was unusually neat. One drawer, however, wouldn't close all the way. I pulled it open. Inside were several folders labeled with the names of roofing suppliers. Beneath them sat a thick manila envelope. Min, no label, just a rubber band holding everything together. I almost put it back. Almost. Instead, I opened it. The first document was the closing statement for the beach house. The second was the mortgage paperwork. Then I saw my own name, or rather something pretending to be my name. The signature looked close enough that most people wouldn't notice, but I noticed immediately. It wasn't mine. The R curved the wrong way. The last name leaned too far to the right. Whoever signed it had copied my handwriting, not written it. I sat down in Mark's office chair because my legs suddenly felt weak. There were more documents underneath: loan applications, income statements, military pay records, copies of my leave and earning statements. He had used my Army income to strengthen the mortgage application without ever telling me. I carefully photographed every page with my phone before putting everything back exactly where I'd found it. By the time I locked the front door behind me, one thing had become painfully clear. This wasn't just a marriage falling apart. Someone had committed fraud. The next morning, before returning to the hospital, I made one phone call. "My name is Rebecca Carter," I told the receptionist. "I need to schedule a meeting with the best family law attorney you have." She asked one simple question. "Is this an emergency?" I looked toward Vanderbilt Children's Hospital across the parking lot. "Yes," I answered quietly. "It is." The attorney's office sat in a red brick building just off West End Avenue, only a few minutes from the hospital. By then, Emma was sleeping comfortably after physical therapy, and Claire had insisted on staying with her for the afternoon. "You need to do this," she told me. "Emma needs a mother who isn't carrying the whole world by herself." Bruft, she was right. The receptionist led me into a quiet conference room, where I met Susan Whitaker, a family law attorney who looked to be in her early 60s. She had kind eyes, silver hair, and the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades watching families fall apart. She didn't rush me. She simply asked, "Rebecca, tell me what happened." So I did. The hospital, the phone call, the beach house, Linda, Harold, the missing money. Finally, I handed her my phone with the photographs I'd taken from Mark's office. Susan studied each document carefully. She zoomed in on the signature. Then, she looked at me. "Did you sign this?" "No." "Have you ever given your husband permission to sign your name?" "Never." She leaned back in her chair. "This isn't just a divorce issue." "I was afraid you'd say that." No, she replied softly. You should be relieved. I looked confused. She folded her hands. Because facts are harder to argue with than feelings. Meaty, that sentence stayed with me. For days, I'd been asking myself impossible questions. Was I overreacting? Had the army taken too much of my time? Had I somehow pushed Mark away? Susan interrupted those thoughts without even knowing they were there. This isn't about whether you've been a perfect wife. She tapped the mortgage papers. It's about whether someone broke the law. For the first time since Emma had been admitted, I felt my shoulders relax. There was a difference between heartbreak and evidence. Susan gave me a yellow legal pad. Starting today, I want you to write down everything you remember. Everything. Dates, conversations, bank accounts, deployments, purchases, even small things. I smiled weakly. I've spent 25 years keeping military records. Good, she said. Treat this the same way. That evening, after returning to the hospital, I started making a timeline. Fort Campbell, our wedding, Mark opening his roofing company, every deployment, every large deposit, every tax refund, every time I transferred money into savings. The pages filled faster than I expected. Patterns began appearing. Money disappeared almost every deployment. Large purchases followed within weeks. A new truck, a fishing boat, now the beach house. I'd been so busy trusting him that I'd never connected the dots. Harold stopped by just before visiting hours ended. He noticed the notebook. Homework, you could call it that. He smiled. I always liked organized people. Then his expression turned serious. I owe you an apology. You've apologized enough. No. He shook his head. I spent too many years convincing myself that staying quiet kept the family together. He looked toward Emma's room. It didn't. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, I reached over and squeezed his hand. You came when it mattered. His eyes filled with tears. So did you. That night, my phone buzzed again. Mark. His first call in 4 days. I watched it ring until voicemail answered. A minute later, another call. Then another. Finally, a text appeared. Rebecca, we need to talk. Dad isn't answering his phone. What did he tell you? I locked the screen without replying. For the first time since all this began, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about the truth, and I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Emma came home 5 days later. Walking through our front door with her felt like bringing sunlight back into the house. She was still weak, and her tiny chest was covered by a carefully bandaged incision, but she was smiling again. That was enough for me. The cardiologist had given me a list that covered 2 full pages. Medications, temperature checks, no rough play, short walks around the yard, a follow-up appointment in 2 weeks. My army leave had been extended, and for the first time in years, work wasn't the center of my world. Emma was. Every evening, we'd sit on the back porch together. She'd point at squirrels running across the fence while I read children's books she had memorized long ago. For a few precious days, life almost felt peaceful. Then everything exploded. It started with Harold on a Tuesday afternoon. He called me. Rebecca, I think Mark knows. My stomach tightened. Knows what? That I gave you the money. I closed my eyes. How? He checked my bank account. I frowned. You share an account. Your mother-in-law insisted we always keep one together. His voice sounded tired. When she saw the withdrawal, she demanded to know where it went. I didn't have to ask what happened next. Harold continued. Mark drove over last night. What did he say? Harold let out a slow breath. He wasn't asking questions. He was yelling. According to Harold, Mark stormed into the house without knocking. You gave her my money. Harold corrected him immediately. No, Mark, my money. Mark didn't like that answer. He accused Harold of betraying his own son. Linda joined in almost instantly. I told you. She snapped at her husband. You've always taken Rebecca's side. Harold laughed softly while telling story. It was the first time in 47 years that I told your mother-in-law she was wrong, without apologizing afterward. I couldn't help smiling. What did she do? Packed a suitcase. I blinked. Seriously? She said she was staying with her sister until I came to my senses. And did you? No. For the first time since I'd known Harold, I heard a little humor in his voice. I helped carry the suitcase. I actually laughed. It felt strange after everything we'd been through, but it also felt good. Then Harold's voice became serious again. Rebecca, before Linda left, she said something. What? She said Mark couldn't let this go. A cold feeling settled over me. Why? He kept asking what I gave you besides the check. I froze. Besides the check. Harold had never told Mark about the letter, or the conversation we'd had about the beach house or the paperwork. Meaty. He thinks there's something else, I said quietly. There is. Harold lowered his voice. I've been cleaning out the garage. What does that have to do with anything? I found another box. That got my attention. What kind of box? The one Mark asked me to store a couple of years ago. My pulse quickened. I opened it. And there are files inside. What kind of files? I haven't looked through all of them. He paused, but I recognized your name on several folders. The next morning, I drove to Harold's house after dropping Emma off with Claire. The box sat on his dining room table. Inside were neatly organized folders, tax returns, business records, mortgage statements. Then I found one labeled Simply Retirement. I opened it. The first page made my hands tremble. It was an email from Mark to his financial advisor. Once Rebecca finishes 20 years in the Army, we'll have access to her retirement benefits. After that, the divorce should be straightforward. The email had been sent nearly 3 years earlier. 3 years. He hadn't just been planning a beach house. He'd been planning an exit. I sat there staring at the page, while Harold quietly poured 2 cups of coffee. Neither of us spoke. There wasn't anything left to say. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the Williamson County Courthouse in Franklin. I arrived 40 minutes early. That habit came from the Army. If you weren't early, you were already late. Susan Whitaker met me in the hallway carrying 2 thick binders and a paper cup of black coffee. You sleep at all? She asked. A couple of hours? She smiled. That's probably more than your husband managed. I wasn't so sure. Mark had always been good at acting confident, even when he wasn't. Susan and I walked into the courtroom together. It wasn't nearly as dramatic as television makes it look. No packed gallery, no reporters, just polished wooden benches, quiet conversations, and people waiting for their own difficult mornings to begin. Mark was already there. He wore the navy suit I'd bought him for our 20th anniversary. Seeing him in it made something inside me ache for just a second. Then I remembered the email. The beach house, the hospital, Emma. The ache disappeared. Linda sat beside him wearing a cream-colored church dress, arms folded tightly across her chest. The moment she saw me, she looked away. Mark didn't. He walked toward me with a smile that felt completely out of place. Rebecca, I didn't answer. We don't have to do this. Susan stepped between us. She has counsel. If you have something to say, you can say it through your attorney. Mark's smile vanished. His lawyer called him back just as the courtroom doors opened. All rise. The hearing began. Susan presented the bank recs first. Every transfer, every withdrawal, every deposit from my military pay. Every document was dated, organized, and easy to follow. The judge quietly flipped through the pages. Then came the mortgage paperwork. Susan handed over enlarged copies of the signature page. Your Honor, she said calmly, Mrs. Carter did not sign these documents. Mark's attorney immediately objected. That's speculation. Susan nodded politely. It would be if we didn't have this. She submitted another folder. Inside was the report from a certified forensic document examiner. The expert concluded that the signature on the mortgage documents had not been written by me. The courtroom became very quiet. Mark shifted in his chair. For the first time all morning, he looked uncomfortable. Then Susan called our next witness, Harold Bennett. I turned toward the back of the courtroom. Harold stood slowly and walked to the witness stand. Mark looked genuinely stunned. Dad. Harold didn't look at him. He raised his right hand, took the oath, and sat down. Susan asked gentle, straightforward questions. Mr. Bennett, did your son ask you to review paperwork related to the purchase of the destined property? Yes. What did you observe? I noticed Rebecca's name wasn't listed as an owner. Did you discuss that with your son? I did. And what was his response? Harold took a deep breath. He told me, military marriages don't always last. Linda suddenly whispered something to Mark. The judge looked up. Counsel, remind your clients not to interrupt. Susan continued. Mr. Bennett, did you later provide Rebecca with $500? Yes. Why? His voice cracked for the first time. Because my granddaughter needed surgery, and my son refused to help. No one spoke. Not even Mark. I looked down at my hands because I knew if I looked at Harold, I'd start crying. The hearing lasted another hour. When it ended, the judge didn't announce a final ruling. Instead, he looked directly at both attorneys. "I want a full accounting of all marital assets, banking records, and financial transfers." Then he looked at Mark, "And I strongly suggest that all relevant financial documents be preserved." Outside the courtroom, Mark finally found his voice. He stared at his father. "You chose her over your own family." Harold answered without raising his voice. "No, Mark. I chose what was right. For the first time in years, I believed justice might actually be possible." 3 days after the hearing, I was helping Emma color a picture of a butterfly at our kitchen table when someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. The sound echoed through the house so hard that Emma jumped and dropped her crayon. I looked through the front window. Mark, his tie was hanging loose, his hair looked uncombed, and he was pacing across my porch like a man who'd run out of places to hide. He hit the door again. Rebecca opened the door. Emma looked up at me with wide eyes. "Mommy, Daddy, mad." I knelt beside her and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "It's okay, sweetheart." Then I quietly picked up my phone and pressed the record button before slipping it into my pocket. I wasn't taking any chances anymore. Another loud bang shook the door. "I know you're in there." I opened the door just enough to step onto the porch, pulling it closed behind me. "What do you want, Mark?" He looked exhausted. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. For just a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then he started talking. "My accounts are frozen." I said nothing. "The bank won't let me touch a dime." Still nothing. "The roofing company's credit line is suspended." He pointed an angry finger toward me. "This is because of you." "No," I answered calmly. "It's because of choices you made." His face turned red. "You and my father set me up. I didn't force you to sign my name." He froze. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. "You don't understand." "I understand exactly." He lowered his voice. "Rebecca, if those investigators finish going through everything..." He stopped. I waited. Finally, he blurted out the question he'd come to ask. "What was in that envelope Dad gave you?" There it was. Not "How's Emma?" Not "Is our daughter recovering the envelope?" That was what had brought him to my front porch. I looked him straight in the eyes. "You still don't get it." His jaw tightened. "I need that envelope." "No. You don't even know what's inside." I almost smiled. "I know enough." He stepped closer. "Give it to me." I took one step back. "Leave." Instead, he reached for my arm. Before he could touch me, another voice cut across the yard. "Take your hand off her." It was Harold. He had just pulled into the driveway with a bag of groceries in the passenger seat. Mark spun around. "Dad, tell her." Harold walked toward us without raising his voice. "I already have. You've ruined everything." Harold looked at his son for a long moment. "No, you did that yourself." Mark's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked less angry than desperate. "They're saying I could lose the company." Harold nodded. "You might. The beach house. You might lose that too." Mark buried both hands in his hair. "This wasn't supposed to happen." I couldn't help answering. "No, it wasn't. You expected me to stay quiet." He stared at me. After a long silence, he whispered, "I never thought you'd fight back." I felt something inside me finally settle. I wasn't fighting back. I was protecting our daughter. Just then, a Williamson County Sheriff's deputy stepped out of another vehicle parked at the curb. Apparently, one of the neighbors had called after hearing the shouting. The deputy spoke calmly. "Sir, you've been asked to leave." Mark looked at me one last time. There was no apology, no concern for Emma, only regret for himself. Without another word, he walked to his truck and drove away. I watched until he disappeared around the corner. When I turned back toward the house, Emma was standing at the front window, waving, not because she understood what had happened, because she believed everyone who left eventually came back. I silently promised myself that the only people I would ever welcome through that front door again were the ones who truly deserved to be there. The divorce was finalized just over 6 months later. It happened on a cool Tuesday morning in November, with orange leaves covering the courthouse lawn in Franklin. There was no dramatic speech, no applause, no celebration, just a judge signing the final order thanking both attorneys and wishing us well. Sometimes the biggest moments in life arrive almost quietly. By then, the financial investigation had uncovered far more than I ever expected. Mark had used my military income to secure loans without my knowledge. He had transferred money from our joint accounts while I was deployed. He had signed documents using my name. The court ordered him to repay what he owed, and several assets, including the beach house, were sold to satisfy the financial judgment. 3. Ironically, the house he had chosen over his daughter's surgery became one of the first things he lost. Harold officially filed for divorce from Linda 2 months after our hearing. One afternoon, he came by with homemade chicken noodle soup for Emma and smiled in that gentle way he always had. "I should have stood up sooner," he admitted. "I poured us both coffee." "You stood up when it mattered." He nodded slowly. "I've learned something." "What's that?" "Keeping the peace and doing the right thing aren't always the same." I thought about those words long after he left. Emma continued getting stronger every week. By Christmas, she was running through the living room, wearing fuzzy reindeer slippers, laughing because our old Labrador Molly kept stealing wrapping paper. You never appreciate ordinary moments until you've almost lost them. A few weeks later, I returned to Fort Campbell. Walking back onto the base felt different this time. Not because my job had changed, because I had. For years, I believed being strong meant carrying everything alone, taking every extra assignment, making every sacrifice, finding excuses for people who stopped showing up when I needed the most. I don't believe that anymore. Real strength isn't about enduring endless disappointment. It's about recognizing when love has become one-sided and having the courage to choose something healthier. Looking back, I don't think revenge was ever my goal. I never wanted to humiliate Mark. I never wanted Linda to be lonely. I didn't wake up hoping anyone would lose a house or a business. I simply refused to let dishonesty become the foundation of my daughter's future. Justice didn't arrive with shouting. It arrived through documents, truth-patient people, and the quiet courage of those willing to do the right thing. Emma is 5 now. Her scar has faded into a thin silver line across her chest. Sometimes she'll ask how she got it. I tell her it reminds us how brave she was. One day when she's older, I'll tell her about another kind of scar, the invisible ones adults carry, and how they can heal too. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that the people who truly love you don't disappear when life becomes inconvenient. They step closer, even when it's difficult. Thank you for spending your time with me and listening to my story. If any part of it reminded you of your own journey, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, I hope you take good care of yourself and the people who have earned a place in your life.